Joining us for the trade deadline edition of the Waterboys podcast is Marco D'Amico from the Hockey Flow podcast, also known as the hockey expert on Twitter. Considering the casting characters that are here today between myself, Frank Pavan, and Marco, our good buddy AJ Cordero would be very proud at all three of us assembling today to talk hockey and break down some of the moves that we saw on Monday for the deadline. Marco, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with Frank and myself.
Oh man, I wish I could do it in real life. I was
too.
thrilled with the invite, so
Right,
I was going to be here. Plus,
Me
it's
too.
the trade deadline. We saw some pretty wild stuff today. So
yeah, that's in part why we wanted you on the show, is because you are a hockey guru. So this it kind of came to me last second. I'm like, hey, let me throw this idea at Marco. Thanks to you for accepting and coming on. I don't know where you want to start. There were, like you said, there were some moves.
Jeez, where do you even begin?
Yeah, I feel like Taylor Hall might be the obvious one, but if you feel Anthony Mantha, that move might be the place to start.
I feel like we can get to all of them. I honestly, I feel like just having this conversation, who would have thought that Matthias Janmark would return more at trade deadline than Taylor Hall?
Here's what I want to know, man. And look, this doesn't have to be a straight up Q&A. I love the fact this is just going to be a conversation, mostly just because we know each other. But like Matthias Janmark gets a bigger return. You could make the argument that Sam Bennett, that trade might have had a slightly better return depending on the prospect, right? I don't get it, man. Like maybe maybe Frank knows. What is it about Taylor Hall that for whatever reason people are all like, I wouldn't touch that guy with a 10-foot pole, and a return for him is that it's like a second round pick and Anders Bjork, not the singer Bjork, Anders Bjork. Like I've seen people say, oh, Taylor Hall's not a good teammate. He's not a good person. Is that true? I don't know. And even then we've seen people who are just, not the greatest of characters who people would still throw out high returns for. I don't get it. Like, why is it that Taylor Hall, a guy who won a Hart Trophy a few years ago, he was on a really crappy Buffalo Sabres team. Why is it that the return for him was so low? I don't get it.
It could be a few things. One, even if his salary was retained at 50%, that's a $4 million cap hit. Not everybody can take that. So right off the bat, are you really going to pay a first round pick to have to do those cap gymnastics and get a third team involved? And it's just, So I get that aspect. You also have to take into account that if you trade your first round pick and acquire Taylor Hall, there's a good chance that first round pick wins the lottery. So right off the bat, that might be problematic as well, especially if you miss the playoffs down the stretch.
For who, though?
For the team that's acquiring him. Taylor Hall has been part of a lot of losing culture in the last 10 years. And I feel like, I made that joke because 5 of the teams that Taylor Hall has appeared on have won the draft lottery. 5 in 10 years. That's pretty ridiculous.
It's pretty bad.
So
it's bad.
You need to take that into account, that he's been part of a losing culture for a really long time. The only time where he's really broken out, he won the Hart. And granted, that was an exceptional season, and he had a lot of chemistry with Nico Hischier, but he has since then not been able to find his groove. And although this is a league that generally pays extra based on reputation and past experience, I feel like GMs in this economy with a limited amount of cap space were just simply not in the mood to overpay for a guy that could be Jekyll or Hyde in their lineup. And I understand it, but at the same time, I feel like Boston is going to get more out of Taylor Hall than we think they were going to get out of him. I think that in the right environment where he is not depended on to be the star, that's where he's going to thrive. And we've seen many players like that in the past. So, if it works out for him and it works out in Boston, power to him. I can't believe I've said that, but power to him. But ultimately speaking, I think if you look at it from a reputation and asset management standpoint, I think GM saw him coming this summer, signing in Buffalo, wanting to play with Jack Eichel, saying that, he wants to, increase his value, increase his chances of winning a championship. And I think everybody kind of read between the lines and saying, I'm going to go and play with one of the top 10 centers in the game, boost my value up, and then get traded to a contender because we all know Buffalo ain't making the playoffs. That's the way I read, and I apologize for Sabres fans. I really wanted you guys to make the playoffs, but that realignment for this season and the way the roster was constructed, the writing was on the wall real early.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of GMs saw that as, look at this guy trying to boost his numbers so that he can get a bigger contract next year and then eventually get traded to a contender at the end of the season should Buffalo not be in. So it's a win-win for the player, and GMs see that coming. And that, to them, in some cases, can show a lack of character. I know that Brian Burke was adamant, like we wanted nothing to know of Taylor Hall. He wasn't even on our radar during his press conference. He was like, no, we weren't even looking into that. And this is Brian Burke. This is like captain, what have you done in the past, not what have you done for me lately when it comes to acquiring players. And he didn't want to know anything. So I think GMs have spoken a lot. And I think maybe the stories that have come out of Arizona, New Jersey, Buffalo just didn't weigh well.
To your earlier point, though, about Taylor Hall not wanting to be the main guy, he came out and said in an interview one of the biggest reasons he wanted to go to Boston was to not be that focal point with a team who's already has a stable top line. Do you think that, will this be the first off, a two-parter? Is this the first time Taylor Hall will not be going up against first D pairings his entire career?
Yes. He was a top left wing for every single team he's played for. Right,
roughly. So essentially, with that to consider, he's not the focal point, sure, in Boston. He's obviously a star. He's admitted that he's at a low right now. He's not full of confidence. I get it. I'm sure that entire roster is kind of on a downer in Buffalo. But if we're supposed to forecast a little further, Boston's obviously a contender. What do you think he's going to bring to this team?
I think he's going to bring a lot of skill to that second line. I feel like they were hoping that Jake DeBrusk would take the next step, and he hasn't. And so Taylor Hall immediately comes in and fills that left wing slot on the second line next to David Krejci, and that bumps DeBrusk into Bjork's position, which was on the third line. It really balances out their lineup. I feel like defensively, we already know the issues in Boston. But offensively, I think this allows them to compete with the Islanders, the Capitals, the Penguins, etc. I feel like they have a lineup that is built to do damage. And I feel like, we have the perfection line and you're adding Taylor Hall. Those are the kind of deadline moves you have to make. I feel like, a lot of people look for like the savior kind of trade at trade deadline. Boston was in a position to actually get a guy that's won a Hart that's going to play on their second line. That never happens. So power to them. And I look forward to seeing how he gels, because David Krejci is a guy that has had a rotation of wingers over the years and has still been able to produce. And I feel like he's going to be able to set up a guy like Taylor Hall quite easily.
Last point I just want to make on Taylor Hall here. Do you think that Taylor Hall's, trade clause or no movement clause or whatever specifically it was in his deal also kind of impacted the potential locations for him? I don't know off the locations that he may have appealed to more or less, but maybe you have an idea. But I'm just curious 100%. If that also played a factor.
I would say 100%. And I know this for a fact because I know that Edmonton was kicking tires. Specifically,
I've heard those same rumblings too.
Yeah. And the fact that, and we know this, Edmonton was willing to move, and Edmonton was willing to move more than a second in Bjork in equivalency to get him. I don't think it would have been necessarily a first round pick straight up, but I think a second plus a better prospect or a player. I don't think they would have needed to move the salary that Bjork took in order to make that move happen. So really it was a second plus a cap dump. I think there was a second plus a prospect involved if it were Edmonton, and that didn't happen because he had a no movement clause. So just like the Sabres benefited from acquiring Jeff Skinner from Carolina because he had a no movement clause, so did they lose their bet in signing Taylor Hall and trading him by giving him that no movement clause. And in doing so, it limited the amount of competition for the player and really handcuffed them in terms of what they can get in return. He absolutely wanted to go to Boston. And if you turn around and give a player with a no movement clause or a no trade clause the option of where to go based on what you're getting, and they see the team they want to go to, they're going to pick that team regardless of what it is that your return is. And we've seen that time and time again. So again, when you're signing a free agent, especially to a 1-year contract and you're a teetering like bubble team, don't give a no movement clause. It's going to limit your return. So in my opinion, it definitely did. Based on his press conference today, not only did he want to go to Boston, he's very interested in signing a long-term extension. So, 100% it lowered his value. And already that we know that they weren't willing, no team was willing to give a first. I feel like it's marginal at best, the difference he could have gotten from another team. So, if it works out for Taylor Hall, it works out for Taylor Hall, but it continues to speak to his character. And I feel like that's why GMs weren't running to the door to, blow Kevin Adams' socks off with an offer.
Good point. I mean, look, we've spoken about Taylor Hall. Another big name. I mean, there's been a few big names that have moved cities. Toronto, Nick Foligno, acquired him for a first-round pick. What were your initial thoughts on that? 33 years old, obviously an NHL vet. Has his better years can be arguably seen to have been behind him. But what do you think he brings to Toronto? Do you like that move by Toronto? And then what do you think he could bring to them?
You see, this is the opposite of Taylor Hall, because I feel like this is a player that doesn't deserve the return that he got, the return based on the fact that he was probably the left winger with the most amount of reputation behind him. Because if you're going to trade on paper for a guy like Foligno, I don't see how he gets a first-round pick in a regular year. But I feel like the perfect storm made it so that, he was positioned as not necessarily being available. And then teams started throwing crazy amounts of assets towards him. And then Kekalainen was forced to have that conversation. And then it led to him being traded. Multiple teams put down first-round picks for this guy. Multiple teams. And ultimately, I feel like Kekalainen sent him, if he was going to trade him, he sent him to where he wanted to go. And, I mean, if you're Foligno, you're going to go play for the Leafs, right? His dad played for the Leafs. He's going to go play for the Leafs. Go and get that ring if you can, because ultimately that's the dream, right? And he gets to go to Toronto. Yeah. For Toronto, it makes sense because this is a team that has Galchenyuk in their top 6. Granted, Galchenyuk has played admirably, great effort. Obviously not goal scoring like he was in past years because obviously the physical limitations, but he's playing well. If you're going to be able to bump Galchenyuk down to the third line and have Foligno on your second, well, then that's incredible middle 6 depth whilst having Simmons and Thornton, on your bottom 6. So continuously adding depth, continuously adding layers, and that's the value in that trade. So I like this from the Leafs perspective because at this point, a second plus one of their top prospects, give them the first, especially with the way this draft is going right now. It's going to be a total crapshoot. So give them your very, very late first at this point and go with it. And if that's the guy you wanted, that's the guy you wanted, because we've seen Toronto hesitate at trade deadline and miss out on players that they necessarily would have wanted, right? And now they went and got their guy. Whether or not it works out, the playoffs are the playoffs. As the NHL has told us in the past, anything can happen. Personally, I wouldn't have paid that, but I get where the Leafs are because they are there.
They're there. And once you're there, you make those moves to just, cement yourself and head into the playoffs feeling confident. Yeah. Julian, you want to say something?
But you also mentioned that first round pick is going to be a late first round pick. And maybe I'm projecting a little bit here, but with the way that the North Division is looking right now, I would be very stunned if the Toronto Maple Leafs weren't the Canadian team that ended up in that final 4 of NHL teams in the playoffs. The Edmonton Oilers, I know they're good, but I don't think they beat the Toronto Maple Leafs in a playoff series. I know goaltending is the one question mark you have to think about with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I think they have enough to beat the Canadiens in the first round if it's those two teams playing against each other in the first round. If Winnipeg wins that series over Edmonton, that might be close, but I think Toronto has a good chance on them. I think people are sleeping a bit on Winnipeg here, but I think Toronto understandably would have the edge. And I think if it's Toronto-Edmonton, I think Toronto could definitely win that. So that first round pick that they're going to put in a deal for Nick Foligno, there's a very good chance it's not going to be middle of it's not going to be middle of the pack. Right. We're talking like 28th, 29th, 30th overall potentially. That's why I feel, thinking about this trade even more. Right. And I don't know. It could be 31st. I don't know. But like for the Foligno trade, we should also mention there's a first round pick and 2 other picks involved as well. And the Leafs are also able to get Stefan Noesen from the San Jose Sharks involved in this trade as well. I feel as if a lot of the criticism that has gone around that first round pick being involved is a little overblown. If the Toronto Maple Leafs were a true middle of the pack team, and this was their way of saying, hey man, we got to go for it because we got to try to make the playoffs, then you hesitate a little bit and say like, wow, like they spent a first round pick. But this is a team that is they're trying to go to win the Stanley Cup this year. It hasn't been this easy for them to make it to, or the pathway doesn't look as clear for them to make the Stanley Cup final. It hasn't looked as clear as it's been in a long time for this franchise. So I feel as if them including that first round pick, I think the criticism around it is just a bit overblown.
Oh, 100%. I feel like at worst, I speak for the Blue Jackets when I say at worst, this pick is going to be 25th overall, 24th overall. Should they just lose in the first 2 rounds and not make it to the conference finals, say? And at best for Toronto, it's 32nd. So it could work out, but at the end of the day, there's very little risk for the Leafs here. You know that this is not going to be a low pick. It's not like if Montreal would have traded it, that's sitting like 16th, 17th overall in the league right now. That's not the same thing. Toronto is 100% making the playoffs. Toronto is 100% going to finish in the top 10 of the NHL standings. This is a no risk for me. As long as they did not trade guys like Amarov, Sandin, Robertson, then it's gravy for them because, again, we've spoken about the volatility of this draft given the lack of viewings from key players over a long period of time. We've spoken about, how scouting teams haven't been able to really get to the gist of the players they're watching. A first round pick to me is irrelevant for the Leafs at this point because their top offensive prospect was drafted in the second round. And no disrespect to Amarov, but I like Robertson that much. So I have no qualms of them going for it because by next year, they're going to have to start thinking about re-signing a guy like Morgan Riley. Their core is going to start disbanding. This is it for the Leafs. These 2 years are it. So if they're going to go and get a guy that could potentially do some damage for them in the playoffs and push them over the edge, that's worth a first. In my opinion, Foligno is worth more than a first in my eyes than what Tampa Bay paid for Gaudreau.
Barclay Gaudreau, yes.
Right.
Or Coleman last year.
Yeah, Blake Coleman. Yeah, those guys went for first. Yeah.
They went for first, although both were signed an extra year. In terms of pure asset value, I still think Foligno is worth more because Foligno is going to slot in guaranteed top 9, potentially even top 6.
Potentially.
And so, for a team that lacks sandpaper in their top 6, there you go, especially a left wing. So for me, I think that they did the right thing. I would honestly say that I was expecting them to go more heavy on goalie, and they did eventually. But I think that their faith in Jack Campbell was shown in this trade deadline because they could have gone heavy swing for a goaltender.
What's the expected timeline on Anderson?
I think it was whenever he feels like he's ready for it. So that's pretty ambiguous.
I think Kyle Dubas during his deadline day presser mentioned that I saw a quote floating around. They said he expects to see Anderson play at some point, but when you look at the depth that's there, I mean, David Rittich is now part of that rotation. Michael Hutchison is still there. And Jack Campbell, I mean, 11 straight wins in a row. I mean, I mentioned this on the Yahoo Sports Hockey podcast. I don't see how you don't go into the playoffs with anyone else other than Jack Campbell as your starter, because the team, not only has he been good, the team has just embraced him and really made him feel as a part of their core. And this was a guy who, looked as if he had gone from a highly touted prospect to this journeyman goaltender and is now seeing the resurgence that he's wanted in his career for quite some time. Actually, you know what? I won't even say resurgence, because it's not as if this guy was good and then was bad. This was a guy who got into the league and was trying to find his footing. He's finally getting that good play that he's wanted for most of his career. And while I understand that some pundits may be hesitant at the fact that, Jack Campbell hasn't gone through a playoff run before, we've seen young goaltenders in hockey history just step into it, and all of a sudden they end up being hockey heroes. And one big reason why, the teams in front of them have to be good. And that's another reason why I feel the Toronto Maple Leafs this year have a good chance. The team in front, they have the number 2 guy, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of, Connor McDavid being the best player in the world. I think Austin Matthews is the number 2 best player in the world. They have him leading the charge, and he has never looked this good more than he has this year. And this is a guy who's doing everything. Their top 6 is set. You mentioned it, Marco, the way their bottom 6 is looking as well. They've bolstered it with veterans, not only guys with just, pretty names or whatever, guys who have gone through lengthy playoff runs in their careers as well and know a thing or two about playing in this league. I think the Toronto Maple Leafs look really good. And I think that, fine, Jack Campbell is a guy you might have to think about because he hasn't been in this situation before, but we're not talking about an 8th seed that has to look at its team and be like, oh God, I hope everything works. Right. Everything else on this team looks solid. The forward core is great, and their defense is pretty good too. They have one of the best shutdown pairings in Jake Muzzin and Hall. Like, I don't know. Like, I think the concern around Jack Campbell is a bit not weird, but maybe not unnecessary. But
it's definitely
I don't think
not
people need
based
to worry
on
as
fact.
much.
It's
yeah,
definitely
like
not
come
based
on.
on fact. It's
I don't know about that,
totally
but I don't
emotional.
Yeah,
it is, and it's a normal human reaction to a lack of precedence. And I can understand that, because when you want to go into the playoffs, you want proven performance. And if you're going to go with a goaltender that, yes, was drafted really high and had all the hype on him with Dallas, and then kind of moved to LA, and now is with Toronto, and has really just kind of taken over from Anderson, you have to go with the hot hand. The issue becomes his first facing of adversity, and that's my fear. He's won 11 straight. What happens when he loses 2 straight? What happens to the psyche then? Because it's super easy, and I say this with great respect. It's super easy to go on a winning streak. I don't care what a goalie looks like on a winning streak, and I'm a fan of the Montreal Canadiens, so I could tell you this.
What do you mean? Happens Wait, what do you mean when you say it's easy to go on a winning streak? I know you mentioned you put great respect to that, but what do you mean when you say it's easy to go on a winning streak?
Emotions when you're on a high. Emotions when your team is rolling and you're the goaltender and your team is putting in an average of 4 to 5 goals a game versus competition, and you only need to let in max 2 to 3 goals to ensure yourself a victory. This is what I'm looking at.
It's easier when you're on a winning streak.
Exactly, because that emotion becomes compounded and it becomes exponential in terms of your own confidence, and you're able to get there. The moment you lose 1 game, after winning so many straight, the moment you lose 1 game, what do? Well, you try to bounce back. But what happens if you lose a 2nd straight? Well, then your psyche, especially for a goalie that doesn't have that amount of precedence, well, then it starts to play with the psyche. And imagine you go into the playoffs, and your last 10 games are at 500. Then the doubts, it starts to set in. And I don't wish this on Soup at all. I honestly, I hope Campbell is able to just go in guns a-blazing into the playoffs. But this is the risk. This is always the risk. This was the risk with Carey Price with Montreal in his early days. This is the risk that the Flyers took with Carter Hart, and they're paying for it now. You need to insulate your goaltenders. And you said it. They have a good base on defense right now. But what happens when the level of competition rises, the games get tighter, that's where you have to be careful.
What's nice though is that their offense can be their defense too, with a team that's so high powered as well. So it could help him out,
Austin
like
Matthews
you said,
has literally
psychologically.
won games. Austin Matthews has
Yeah.
literally won games for the Toronto Maple Leafs this year with his defensive play.
With his
happened.
defensive play.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I don't disagree with that.
The
I
Ottawa
don't disagree
game,
with that.
We
the
mentioned
Ottawa
that, yeah.
overtime game, come on. He won in that game, breaking off that potential 2-on-1, stopping that pass from Thomas Chabot. I remember the whole play, and then he enters the zone, and then they end up winning that game. It's
Yep,
happened.
absolutely. And I feel like that was both Thomas Chabot bombing as usual, and then obviously Matthews just hockey IQ I'm just out of this world.
Yeah.
So put him in a playoff setting again, but with a goaltender that's not going to let a weak one squeak by him in the third period. And you're going to see a Leafs lineup that's not going to crumble under pressure. And that's what I'm most worried about, is that once again, they're looking for a savior in net. And that's where I get a little concerned. But that's where they went and got a guy like Riddick that's going to be able to come in and really just kind of cement the goaltender position just in case Anderson's not up to it. So in my honest opinion, I feel like Dubas was able to really focus on the two positions that were the weakest, which were left wing and goaltender, and just bolstered. So in my honest opinion, I think Toronto is well set for a long playoff run. Hopefully for them.
Right.
I don't know, unless they play Montreal, in which case not hopefully. They
You're
win
letting
this,
your fandom show here, Marco.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. We have not seen Montreal versus Toronto in our lifetime. We have not. It's been 42 years, guys. So I know that when the puck drops, I will not be impartial. So I have to discuss it openly whilst knowing my own bias to discuss this properly. But
you do a good job, though.
If the Leafs are going to be able to beat the Canadiens in the playoffs, and it seems like that's going to be the matchup at this point because Calgary is sold, Vancouver has sold. If that is the matchup, they will blow by Montreal if their goaltending is able to hold up as it has this season. Now, when it comes to Winnipeg, that's where the inclusion of a Foligno is going to push them over the top, because Foligno will assist them in countering lines exactly like Blake Wheeler, Scheifele, and whomever you want to put with them, because that's a guy that's going to be in Blake Wheeler's face. Blake Wheeler does not perform well when he has a player in his face. And there's no better way to counter a right winger that doesn't like adversity like a left winger that absolutely loves to be in somebody's face. So in my honest opinion, I think the Leafs are built for the playoffs. I've never said that in my life, but I'm saying it now. They're built for the playoffs. And if they continue down this route and they're able to continue their fire that they have had over the last 15, 20 games, I don't know that there's many teams that are going to be able to beat them.
They're a wrecking ball, man. They are a scary team. There's, I think, two more trades that I wanted to talk to you about that are worth
absolutely
speaking about, worth mentioning. I wanted to talk about the Quebec boy, Anthony Mantha, getting a haul for Detroit.
It's ironic because Hall didn't get a haul, but
right, good one.
Cool.
That's right.
I see what you did there. The wordplay.
I mean, Anthony Mantha is a particular case. I mean, I think Stevie Y has been in Detroit long enough now that he's able to pinpoint players that he'd like to keep around for the long haul, again, pun intended, versus not. And I feel like he immediately kind of pinpointed Anthony Mantha and was like, okay, well, this kid just wants to play now. I don't think he's interested in a rebuild. They had their long saga over the summer, and they finally settled on a deal. I think the writing was on the wall from the get-go. And I thought that he would be traded within the next year. And this just continues to add flexibility to the Detroit Red Wings, especially leading up to the expansion draft, where they can, again, add further assets, just like a guy like they acquired in Verana. Verana probably would have wound up being an expansion draft casualty in Washington, should they have decided to keep a guy like Oshie instead. And so they're able to extract a player like that, along with a first and a second and a cap dump for Anthony Mantha. Anthony Mantha has had a very underwhelming season for the Detroit Red Wings, and we can't even complain that he's not surrounded because he's playing on he's getting top minutes, he's getting top line treatment. He's playing with Larkin on a power play, and he's just not producing like he did last year with the same players. So I feel like there was just a drop in motivation, and Yzerman was presented with, a deal, that continued to elevate and elevate and elevate. There were three teams that were really going back and forth on him. And ultimately, it made sense for Washington, in my opinion. I feel like we spoke about the Leafs, I think their first round pick, irrelevant in this draft. And a second round pick in 2022, I mean, okay, sure. When you're hitting on guys like Connor McMichael, you don't need those picks because you're hitting when it counts. So you can make these trades. I feel like Mantha is the perfect guy to have with Nick Backstrom on the second line. I feel like if you're going to put Kuzi with Ovechkin and Tom Wilson, then having Oshie and Backstrom and now Mantha, watch out. I feel like this is a team that's going to be very dangerous going down the stretch. They have a lot of leadership and a lot of good guys on the back end, especially with Zdeno Chara joining them. And so they're able to kind of move forward accordingly. When you look at Detroit, though, this serves Detroit on so many levels. You look at just future assets. They get a first and a second for taking on Mantha as well. Panic as well in his contract. And Jacob Vrana is a very comparable player offensively over the last few years to Mantha. And he can continue to improve as that team continues to improve. So to me, if you're able to play him in a top six setting, even a top line setting, he can continue to improve. And to me, if you're looking at it from a salary perspective and an asset management perspective, I think that this worked out for both clubs quite well. But the value still seems towards Detroit for me. Even if we know that the 2021 draft is going to be a crapshoot, I would never, and I mean never, doubt Steve Yzerman and his scouting staff when it comes to pulling out a diamond in the absolute rough, no matter the pick. And if you're giving them a first round pick, they may find the next Kucherov with that first round pick. Mm-hmm. It's Stevie Y, and I'll bet on Stevie Y any day. And that's where it ends.
So, Marco, earlier in the episode, we spoke about Nick Foligno. His teammate, or now former teammate, is the last trade I really want to talk to you about in David Savard being shipped out of Columbus and into, to his new city of Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay had to give up a first and a third. I don't know what you think of David Savard as a player. I don't know. I feel like he's a pretty solid defenseman. He's hit 30 years old. And I guess, like we mentioned him as well, Kekalainen, just dealing players in Columbus. What do you feel like this adds to Tampa Bay? Obviously, first and a third is pretty good return, but
salary retention too. Don't forget about that as well.
That's right.
Stevie Y, your boy, involved in that.
That's right. So David Savard, what are your thoughts on him?
I think David Savard is, what you would expect from a top four, like second pair guy. I feel like he's robust. He's got decent amount of speed, good at limiting offense, can provide limited amount of offense himself. But when you're looking at a team like Tampa Bay that has McDonough, that has Hedman, and that already has Sergachev, I don't think offense is the issue on your back end. So what you need is someone to stabilize that back end. And those are three left shooting defensemen I just mentioned. And the only right shooting defenseman of worth on that team right now is Eric Cernak. So to me, it makes sense. It makes total sense. Julien Brisebois is a guy that knows what he wants and goes out and he gets it. And, given this buyer's market that we were dealing with right now, maybe they went pretty hard, pretty quickly, but they got their guy and they got their guy before the frenzy. And I feel like that's where you pay. That's where you give that extra pick. And I believe it was a first and a third to Columbus. And then the fourth round pick was for the third party team to retain the 50%. So a first, a third, and a fourth to have a guy at 20% his value so you could fit him under the cap. I don't know. I'm going to do that any day if my core consists of the aforementioned defensemen, Braden Point, Nikita Kucherov when he comes back, Stamkos, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, if salary is your only impediment, then you pay what they paid to get a guy like David Savard in the lineup. And to me, it made sense. It made sense then. It makes sense, especially now that trade deadline is done and you've seen the returns that have come. I feel like he's going to bring a very strong level of stability that Ryan McDonough couldn't necessarily bring, being two left-handed guys playing on the same pairing with a Victor Hedman. Here you have a perfect complement for Victor Hedman. And so I feel like that in and of itself is worth the trade. And quite frankly, when you look at Tampa's roster, can you really say that this is a team that couldn't realistically repeat now? I can't. So,
right.
If you put Tampa Bay right now versus Carolina, Florida, Toronto, Vegas, I think they could still win. So Colorado, still.
Really? Okay.
I think Tampa Bay would have their way with Colorado, honest to God. And the reason for that, and I no disrespect to anybody that plays in Colorado, but if we were talking about goaltender issues with the Leafs, I have serious qualms about goaltending issues with Colorado, despite the acquisition of Dubnyk, despite the acquisition of Johansson. I don't trust that goalie section of their club. I do like their defense. I love their offense, but it's always going to be that goalie position. And that is the most pivotal position in an elimination game, in my honest opinion. You always need that goalie to catch fire. And so I think that there are more chances of that happening in Tampa Bay than there are of that happening in Colorado. And I feel like the major thing that always seems to be missing in Tampa Bay is that top end kind of defenseman that's able to kind of step in. And especially if it's a right-handed shot, which is not something that is generally abundant in the NHL. It was definitely worth the price.
A good stabilizer, like you said. That's what it comes down to. And the last thing before we wrap up this episode, which once again, thank you for your time, Marco. Much appreciated.
All good.
We haven't been able to dive into this much on this show in particular. It's just a deep dive into hockey, into NHL. So I'm happy we're doing this episode. Yeah. I want to talk about the Canadian North Division. We've talked about Toronto, where yes, we understand they're the class of the Canadian North. But what do you make of you said Vancouver and obviously Calgary have kind of made it easier for Montreal to just cement themselves as the fourth seed. Like if we're just going to talk about Montreal here, we could talk about Winnipeg as well. And is Montreal just, what do you make of them? I don't even know what to make of them at this point. And what makes me even more disappointed is that I was so. And you know what? It's partly my fault too, because I shouldn't have got my hopes this high. But at the beginning of the season, I almost essentially sold myself that they could have sustained this. But then looking back, you see that they were doing things in unsustainable parts of a hockey game, whether it be penalty kill goals or other unsustainable aspects of a game. And now you see certain players are regressing. You see they can't even. I mean, it's tough for them to compete or at least build a win streak. It's a bit dark or grim now for Montreal. Like it's hard to feel optimistic about this team heading into the playoffs is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Is that fair assessment? It kind of seems like it feels vanilla. It feels vanilla.
I'll be clear with you, and I'll be very straightforward on the subject.
Go off, sir. Go off.
If the Montreal Canadiens as an organization felt like this was their time, they would have spent far more assets on improving this club than they did. And that's it. The way that I look at a club, I look at what their general manager does. If their general manager goes all out, they feel they have a shot. If the general manager decides to play it safe, they themselves have doubt. I've always felt that way. unless, of course, your club is an absolute powerhouse like Colorado, and you just do like a minor deal here or there. When you're a club that's teetering, that's that close to the bottom of participation in the playoffs or not, and you make these value moves, well, we're going to call them value moves because I don't feel like he lost any of his trades by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I think he won them hands down. But that's the classic representation of the Bergevin era. He's never really lost a trade hands down, other than the Drouin trade.
Yeah, exactly.
Trade.
Exactly.
So he's always kind of won trades, and it's always kind of improved his club, but it's never made the ultimate difference.
It's never pushed the needle.
Exactly. And I feel like if he had the utmost confidence in his club, then we would have had a Thomas Vanek for a second round pick style trade circa 2014, like the Montreal Canadiens had this year with, a Mike Hoffman that didn't end up moving, or a Rickard Rakell that was available that didn't end up moving. He would have made it happen. And I feel like that's the thing, is that a GM that simply waits for the bargain has no confidence in his club being able to go the absolute extra mile. Teams that think they're going to do that, like Toronto, are willing to sacrifice the ultimate asset in a first-round pick to go and get the guy they think is going to put them over the top. Montreal doesn't need a guy that's going to put them over the top. They need a guy that's going to get them to the top. And therein lies the difference. That methodology changes everything. Where I am more confused is not with what Montreal is doing, but what the Winnipeg Jets are doing. How does a team with that top six go into the playoffs with that top four on defense? It makes no sense to me how the only move that the Winnipeg Jets made was a 6th round pick for Jordy Ben. None. Zero. Zilch. I feel like Montreal improved their defense better than they did. That makes no sense to me with a club that's literally chasing Toronto right now. I feel like there's one club in this division that could have challenged Toronto to come out of the North Division. It was the Jets, and they had one job, and that was, for once, improve your defense like you've tried to improve your offense year after year. And they simply couldn't. This is a team that gave a first-round pick for Paul Stastny in a season they had no business thinking they were going to win a cup. And here they are, against all expectations. Their defense is holding up. They clearly need help on the left-hand side because Josh Morrissey can't do it by himself. And the only thing you can do is go and get Jordy Ben? No, unfortunately not enough for me. I feel like Montreal did more. And that's sad to say. Montreal did more to improve their lineup in the year of 2021 outside of, the Pierre-Luc Dubois for Patrick Laine trade. I feel like Montreal did more to improve their lineup than Winnipeg did. And given the fact that, we talk about Price, we talk about Weber with Montreal.
Yeah.
What about Wheeler in Winnipeg, right? What about Hellebuck? What about, Scheifele? His sweetheart deal is going to come to an end real soon. And if you're not able to extract prime results while he's at his best in terms of AAV, and that contract comes to an end and he's an unrestricted free agent, and you got to think about re-signing him, and the guy asked for $10 million and completely throws your cap structure out of whack, you missed out on that opportunity. And I feel like Winnipeg and Kevin Cheveldayoff to begin with have been wasting that opportunity for a long time. It's not like Montreal. Montreal simply just got out of a rebuild for crying out loud. They're transitioning into, I'm going to start making the playoffs every other year. Whereas Winnipeg we were a year removed from being a cup contender, lost a bunch. Now we're back to high level, and you don't add anybody to complement that. I think it was a lost opportunity from Winnipeg. I think they could have thrown a lot of assets at a team that was willing to give them a top 4 left defenseman. And the fact that they didn't, I honestly believe will cost them in this division.
Do you think Toronto, Winnipeg in a series that goes the Leafs' way? Because I think, while I do think the Leafs probably win that series, I think the Winnipeg Jets are slept on by a lot of different 100%. Pundits because of the fact that you alluded to it, the fact that a lot of their guys have gone through playoff runs over the last few years. This is a core that has has seen playoff wins as opposed to the Toronto Maple Leafs, which if they win a playoff series this year, that's going to be big for that core, right? Because they were always knocking on the door and they weren't able to make something happen. But the Winnipeg Jets, they've been up the ladder for a playoff run before. I'm very stunned at the fact that they weren't able to get that top 4 defenseman for this team. Maybe if Nashville was in a different position, they would have been a bit more all in on Matthias Ekholm. But hey, the price might have gone up too high. I do want to just ask this really quickly, though. You mentioned the Montreal Canadiens, and you don't seem all that enthused with some of the moves that they were still able to make, even though they were pretty much active just before the deadline hit. Do you think, like, what do you think is the outlook for the rest of this season for this Montreal Canadiens team? Is this a team that's just comfortably in 4th? Do you think the Flames, even though they've been kind of teetering off as well, I think as of this recording, I mean, then again, I shouldn't mention the points because there was a game that was played last night. I will say the Flames aren't that far off in terms of points from the Montreal Canadiens. Like, how do you see this season ending? You're comfortable with the Montreal Canadiens being in the playoffs at this point?
Yep. And I feel like Montreal is at its lowest point, and so is Calgary. I feel like they're all sinking right now. And one of those teams is going to bounce back up. And I feel like it's the team that has the most amount of motivation to do so. You've gotten rid of Riddick in Calgary. Like, you're going to write a rookie goaltender or Markstrom that's just simply not living up to the hype that he had at the beginning of the season. The psychological game is played. Montreal is without Brendan Gallagher, Yoel Armia, and Carey Price. When those 3 come back, it's a whole new team.
Yeah.
Well, right? Gallagher won't be back until playoffs, or maybe not even. So.
But that's my point. Just the fact that that Gallagher would be back for the playoffs is motivation.
It's a huge boost. It's a huge boost.
Exactly.
For sure.
Carey Price will be back. And I feel like that will also aid them because there'll be no excuse about him being tired. He'll have been off for at least 2 weeks. So I don't think that's going to be an issue either. And there's the added fact that I don't even think Montreal is icing the best hockey team that they can because Cole Caulfield is playing in Laval.
Oh boy. You brought up the...
And Julian, I'm not even going to say call Cole Caulfield up right now. I'm not even going to say that.
Okay.
Laval has a break from April 18th to April 30th. And I will bet you every shiny cent I still have, defunct shiny cent I still have in my house, that Cole Caulfield will be called up shortly after the 18th of April to play for the Montreal Canadiens.
Okay.
And I'm not expecting him to burn the league, but I'm expecting him to contribute more offensively than anyone named Lehkonen, Armia, Byron, you name it, playing in the bottom 6 right now. I feel like giving him a third-line role with heightened power play minutes in the situation that Shea Weber is in right now. Play him at the left circle of your power play instead of Shea Weber on that first wave. The actual Ovechkin spot. A guy that can actually play the same way that Ovechkin does. And if ever he gets caught on the power play with the puck and not in position, can actually make a play out of it instead of just being like, oh shit, right? Like Weber does every time he's given the puck on the power play. So put Caulfield on that wave. Or better yet, if you absolutely want to keep Weber there, then shift Kotkaniemi to the right circle and have Caulfield on the left circle, and you have 2 one-time options on the power play. And that completely changes the offensive dynamic of the Montreal Canadiens. And I just want to see that for one game, because that could be the one game that changes the entire psyche of that team.
Okay.
Well, and that's why you got to be patient. That's why you got to be patient.
Marco D'Amico of the Hockey Flow podcast spitting absolute fire on his appearance on the Waterboys podcast. I didn't think we'd get to talk about Cole Caulfield, and lo and behold, near the end of his appearance, we discuss the highly touted phenom in the Montreal Canadiens system. Marco, thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate you hanging out with Frank and myself. If you want to plug, well, actually, no, we don't need to plug wherever you're at, because I think we'll mention at the intro. But if you do, if there's anything else you want to mention, please do, in case we didn't mention it off top.
Oh, you guys covered it, man. It's all good.
Hey, no worries. There we go. Look at that.
Thanks so much, man.
Look at that. Thank you. You see, sometimes I get the housekeeping wrong. Sometimes I get it right. You know what? Hey, you know what? That's fine. Marco D'Amico of the Hockey Flow podcast. Thank you so much, dude.
It's a pleasure, guys.